Holbein's Irodori Gouache sets are designed around the 4 seasons: spring, summer, autumn and winter, and this is a selection of 48 of the most beloved traditional colours of Japan. The colours are based on history and names inspired by nature, with 4 beautiful sets of 12 colours in each in 15mm tubes, each with completely different colour moods. So today I wanted to test all 4 sets properly, swatching every single colour, mixing them together to see what other tones we can create, and finally painting 4 landscapes to see how they actually behave in a painting beyond just swatching. If you're new around here, my name is Katie, I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and I picked these up in Japan for a bargain price, so I'm really excited to test them all out and share them with you all. So we're going to start with the autumn set. This one and the spring set were top of my list to buy whilst out there. I feel like autumn might be the most cohesive set of the 4 in terms of really echoing the seasonal colours that I'd expect. Everything naturally harmonises into earthy oranges and muted browns. It really does have those autumn fall vibes. It does have a few brighter colours, which you can see I'm swatching here with the safflower red, the orange and the gardenia yellow. And even the amber is quite bright, but I think paired with the browns and the greens, it's definitely muted and you can mix some really lovely shades here. I think the Myosotis blue, which we'll come on to from the spring set, would pair beautifully with these really warm greens and the oranges. This green here, leek green, is very, very bright, but if you've seen before on my channel and I've talked about colour mixing in this video, I'll link above, there's a really easy way for us to dull it down and make it a bit more natural. Now the pine tree green is much more my kind of thing, but the elm green is my top green. I've already got this tube separate from this set, so I already knew I'd love it, and it's definitely a gorgeous olivey green. Then there's one blue, which is the indigo, and also an antique rich gold. It's a warm gold, so I can see why it fits with the other shades, but I really just don't use metallics. So I'd love to swap that in with the lighter blue I mentioned, and then I think it would be perfect. Okay, so this is the autumn set all swatched out. I want to do some mixing now. So I've obviously talked a little bit about the shades that are in there. Really don't think I'm going to use this gold. It does have a slight shimmer. There's no like glitter specks in it, but there's definitely a shimmer. But I want to see what other colours we can mix. Now this doesn't come with a white. I think white is a really helpful mixing colour. Obviously with gouache, if you want to lighten the opacity, you can add more water, but I do want to try and play around with mixing with these, so we're going to do that for each of them. Obviously I'm only on autumn now, but it's going to be interesting just to see what other shades we can get. There's quite a lot of midtones here. There's not really many light colours, certainly not very dark colours. This indigo I thought would be a lot darker, certainly based on the tube, but let's do some mixing now, and I'll share my thoughts as we go. So like I said, I do just want to show some mixing. So mixing up a purple here, which obviously wasn't in here, but with the blue and the red, there's loads of different options. I definitely recommend understanding a bit of colour theory to really neutralise some of your colours, maybe using a mother colour to make things work. But here you can see I'm mixing a different kind of brown with the oranges and the greens, but it really does mean that some of the brighter greens can be muted with our other colours in this set. I can mix up a bright colour myself just with that indigo and the gardenia yellow, so some of the greens I think aren't necessary. Like you could definitely have smaller sets here. You don't have to have all 12 to be able to mix some of the colours, but I do think it's curated really nicely. I was a big fan of the Amber Cork Yellow, I really like that one, and then the Amber surprised me with how lovely that is. That's like a really warm ochre. Like I mentioned there, I would love a bit of a difference between the Amber Cork Yellow and the Gardenia Yellow. I think they're both cool tones, so a really warm yellow would have been nice. Maybe the G821, which is in the spring set. I did try mixing in the Antique Rich Gold just to see if I could get that to work, but it still has that shimmer. Perhaps I'll use it in the future, but I just don't think I use those in my palettes. So you can see here the final swatches, so you can see it's still bright, that we definitely got those really bright ones at the top. But the overall tone, especially compared to the other sets, is definitely muted. Okay, we're on to the spring set now, so definitely a wider range of pastels and some lovely bright, definitely spring-like colours. They're quite opaque, these ones, so because they have a lot of white pigment in them, it's definitely laying down really nicely on the page, definitely more like the gouache texture that you'd expect, because they have a lot of white pigment giving that pastel effect. I like the cool and the warm yellow here, so we've got the Japonica yellow for the warmer yellow and then the lemon, so I think that would be really nice. The lemon reminds me a little bit of the Chinese green. It's definitely showing up a little bit more green on camera, but I think it's helpful to have both. I do think that there are some dark shades missing in this set, so all of them are pretty light or mid-tone, so you can see that here. The pop of green, so the pale patina, is lovely. I think that's a really nice set. I think overall this set is definitely the prettiest. I think they look really lovely and it is a gorgeous palette, but I do feel like I was missing the darker shades. So they're all very, very light, and I definitely struggled to mix some darks, which you'll see in a minute. I did like this purple. This is Bellflower. I think that's really pretty, especially paired with the Myosotis blue. And then we have the silver grey and antique silver. Again, not a fan of antique silver. I just am not a fan of metallic colours, and you'll see when I'm painting later I use a white with all of these. I think having a white in these sets would have made them perfect, so you could just get a set. I understand the argument that everybody has white anyway, but I just think it would get more use than the metallics. So I did mix up a darker brown. That was probably as dark as I could get it just because of the pigments in these, so you can see that sort of neutral one there. This mix here was my favourite, so this one is Pale Coral with Myosotis Blue. Really love that, so you can get some really lovely neutrals. It doesn't have to be as bright as you can see these colours were, so definitely a case of mixing in purples and blues with some of the brighter colours just to dull them down. So you can get quite a wide range, but like I mentioned, I do think that we are missing dark tones here. So if I wanted to have a really, really dark brown or a really dark green, I would need to mix in other colours. The Dayflower Blue is probably just a bit too mid-tone to be able to mix those, so I think like an indigo would work better if you did want to mix the darker shades. Then we are moving to winter. So winter definitely shifts dramatically cooler and actually has a lot more dark shades than I was expecting. I feel like some pastel colours like we had in the spring set would work here, but ones that do lean cooler, like a very cool soft pink. We have some icy neutrals, which we'll get to, so the cleaner blues and a bit of a rogue, but a beautiful cool pink with Peony G872. Now, when I swatched this one, the patina, I was actually quite shocked that it came out green. The colour on the tube was so dark, and it was only when I added water that this cool emerald sort of green appeared. But it's a lovely colour that definitely reminds me of winter and pine trees, but russet green, G850, is definitely my kind of green. That one is much more up my street, so I was happy to see both the cool and warm greens in this set. There's no black, but there is a third blue, so a very deep navy that is beautiful, but alas, we do have another gold. This one is the antique gold, so different from the antique rich gold. It's not quite as warm, but still another metallic which I won't use. So overall, I feel like this set is lacking in light tones, so a bit of a contrast to the pastels. Obviously, a lot of these shades definitely don't have the white pigment in. Rikyuu Grey and the Geisha Blue probably will, because they are definitely more opaque, but I do feel like it would be helpful to have more of a pastel shade in here. I know in winter the light is lacking, but with the colours bouncing off snow and the clear light that you can get in the winter months, I feel like it could have done with a bit more balance. I do really like the patina like I mentioned, and I think the saviour for this set for me is the Geisha Blue, which I use a lot in the painting that you'll see. I'm trying again, so this is the gold here that I'm trying to mix in. It's coming up much brighter on camera than it is in real life. It's always a bit tricky to get them as accurate as possible on screen, so I really recommend looking at loads of different swatches before you buy. But I'm using the patina here at the bottom and mixing it in with the red, and I really love the shade that I get there. Again, it's still dark shades and like quite muted in terms of the browns and the greens, but still a really lovely set, and it definitely surprised me how much I enjoyed using this one, considering it was probably the furthest down on my list. So using that green and the red combination here, I do mix up quite a lot of browns. I find that useful in my landscape work, but I do love that they did include the peony colour. I think that one definitely helps to lighten the entire set. Okay, and then last up we have summer. Now this, I was surprised at the colour palette for the summer set. Super duper bright shades, but I suppose, you know, that does work with the bright summer vibe. We've got the very bright red, the orange, so we've got scarlet, orange, yellow, canola yellow, and then we've got one brown, the Tasha brown, and then a few different greens. It does feel like a really nice balance. I definitely think that this has the most rainbow colour palette with the traditional red, yellow, orange, green, etc. So a full sort of range of colours. A lot of these aren't quite as opaque as the spring set because they don't have the white pigment in there, so you can see that with my brush marks here showing a little bit more obvious than you do with the pastel colours from the spring set, and again that's because of the white. So a little bit more of a watercolour vibe. Now this set is the only one that includes both a white and a black. Now like I said, I use white all of the time, but black is definitely a colour that I rarely use. I was impressed with the vibrancy here, so we've got that evergreen, which definitely is a bit too bright for me, but of course having the scarlet I can mix that in and make it a bit more neutralised. I do really like the bamboo green. I think that's a gorgeous turquoise, so I really like that one. And then the blues, so we have got an oriental blue and a ultramarine. So the oriental blue again is a cooler blue and the ultramarine is definitely warmer. So it does feel like this one has more of a balance of the warm and cool colours, which is nice. They are all mid-tone though, but it doesn't matter in this one because this is the only set that includes a white and a black. Like I said, white is the colour I use all of the time when mixing, but black is a colour I rarely ever use. So what I did, and you'll see this in a minute when I'm doing the mixing, is that I will mix it with a yellow. So I can use that black and mix with the canola yellow from the set to mix a green, and that definitely worked much better for me. And you can use black to mix a really quick and easy green shade, so mixing it with yellow is a really good tip. If you also have black and are unsure how to use it, then just make loads of greens with it. I think that's the way I will definitely use black. So you can see I'm going to do that here. It doesn't need much, but there's so many different pigments and colour within that black. You can get a lovely warm green. So I am mixing a slightly darker shade here with the red and the blue. It does come with the purple, so the Ido Violet, but I do like that it does come with the white. So you can see I'm mixing up some pastel colours here, so the pink and the lilac, and I feel like this one is a really good all-rounder. The summer palette definitely surprised me because the colours are definitely deeper than I expected. There are those sort of blue-greens and the intense sunset tones that do feel tropical, but I can mix a really nice range of tones because of the black and the white. So there we go, everything is swatched out now. I definitely have some favourite shades here. I'm not a fan of the metallics. I really think that they should have a white in there instead. So 3 out of 4 had a metallic, a gold or a silver. The summer is the only one with the white and the black, and I really think white should be swapped into the other ones. Obviously they're not going to change anything, but just for me, I don't love using metallic paint. As you saw, I did try to mix with it. It will always have that sort of shine. You'll be able to see that separation because of the pigments in there. But yeah, definitely learned a lot. Really enjoyed the mixing. I think with the spring, there's some really nice neutrals that I could mix in here. The autumn is much more muted, even though you've got these brighter colours. I think this one I'd like to be a little bit warmer. They're a little bit more similar than I'd like. I think if this one swapped with this one, you know, just for my personal preference, there are things that I would prefer if I could make my own ultimate set. I was really surprised by the summer. I really love these brighter shades, and I think because you've got those mixing colours in there, you can get a lot more variation. Obviously the pastel colours, you can get that neutrals as well by mixing some of the colours. Really was impressed mixing the yellow with the black to create this. Instead of mixing it here, which I did with the green and the orange, I could just mix that with the black and the yellow, so that was fun. So I'll use the black for that more than anything. And then winter is obviously a lot moodier. I do love this green. That's probably my favourite from this set. But it's really interesting to see all of the differences. So I think most of them are warm, except for the winter one. This is a warmer green down here. But yeah, I think some of these are quite cool tones. But it is a really nice mix. I'm really happy that I got them. I'm going to talk you through how I'm going to be using them and also my final thoughts as I create some art with these. So I'm going to do a panel for each of the seasons, painting with them so I can get a bit more of a feel of how I would use them and share my thoughts with you. So I hope you enjoyed watching all that swatching and mixing, and now onto some art. Okay, so we are on to the painting process for this video. So we've got 4 different panels. I'm just splitting up my page into the 4. They're not perfectly halfway. If you know me, I don't measure at all. I just eyeball it, but I did want to try and split them as equally as possible and then use the colours from each set to do a different landscape. I did toy with the idea of doing the exact same reference, but it felt a bit limiting with some of the colours, so I picked references from Pexels, which is a copyright-free site. I'll leave a link to all of the references I used down below. I did add in my own elements to make all of the colours in the sets work, but I think this was a better way to show you how these sets can actually be used within a painting. So we're starting with spring. I always start with my skies. We've got that gorgeous Myosotis blue. I definitely mixed it in with the white. So within all of these palettes, I do add in the white because I do find it such a helpful mixing colour. I didn't add in the black, just using the white, but you can see here where I am neutralising some of the colours, but I'm not adding in any other colours apart from the white that aren't in the set. So I'm hoping to show you the full range of these sets within each panel and each landscape. I tried to use all of the colours, but they might have been mixed in with others, so I'm not using them straight from the tube. Generally, that's not how I work anyway, so I do find that this is just the way I would paint with them, so I really wanted to just show you how they work in situ and how I would use them normally. So for spring, I leaned into softer edges and lighter values because the palette did naturally push me towards a really gentle landscape, and obviously because of those white pigments within it, it came out quite pastel anyway. The translucency I built up bit by bit, and I do really like the overall vibe of this one. I think that is created simply because of the colours that were in that set. So it's a very soft, very tranquil feeling, and I do really like how they layer. I love using gouache. I am planning on doing a whole gouache video at some point, hopefully this summer. So if you do have any questions about gouache in general, then do let me know because that is definitely going to be in the works. It's just trying to work out how to condense a lot of knowledge into one YouTube video. You can see I have mixed up some slightly darker tones, so a darker green here, and then I really wanted to add in that pop, so trying to get that lovely turquoise in, which is the pale patina, and just using that to highlight some of my edges. Now for all of these, I don't come in with mixed media. I am normally a mixed media artist, and I very, very rarely just use gouache. I pretty much 90% of the time come in with coloured pencils and near colours on top. But I didn't for these paintings. All of them are purely gouache, and I'm just using my paintbrushes to apply all of the paint as my details. Usually I do love the contrast of textures, but I wanted this to be just about the gouache. Okay, on to the summer set now. So this one came with the white and the black anyway. And this one is definitely about boldness and saturation. So I wanted to try and get that contrast, which is why I use quite a lot of white. I'm mixing in that ultramarine for the sky, which is beautiful. It is similar to the Myosotis blue, but obviously you have to mix it yourself. So I think I'm definitely going to get a lot of use out of the Myosotis blue just straight from the tube. I did mention I rarely do that, but there are definitely some colours within these where I could easily do that. And then trying to get a whole range of greens. So again, because you've got the yellows and the cool blues and the warm blues, you can easily mix a huge amount of colours within this set. I do often up the saturation within my paintings anyway, but to try and balance some of that intensity in the saturation, then I did, pare down some of the greens with the red, the scarlet, the brown, the Tasha brown, just into some of the greens, but I did really enjoy the vibrancy and the freshness that this palette gave me. It definitely felt like summer, and I did add in a tree here just into the foreground, and then in the very front of the image I'll add in some scarlet flowers. I feel like this is a really good all-rounder. It did surprise me by how much, I could work with this one, which makes sense because of the variety of colours in there. It was just about trying to work with that boldness and saturation. But like I said, I do think that the white was super helpful. With the other ones, I didn't use the metallics just because I don't use them in my paintings. I find them impossible to use. I might use them perhaps to highlight a metallic thing if I ever draw something or paint something like that. But it's just not something that I use or would photograph well. So for me, it kind of just feels like a waste of space within these. So let me know if you have any tips for how you use your metallics in your work. Okay, we are on to autumn next. And this one, like I said earlier, feels pretty harmonious and quite easy to use. This palette it almost kind of painted itself because the colours just naturally harmonised without much effort, and it is what I am used to. These kind of more muted greens and the warm greens and tones are definitely the ones I paint with the most. So I tried to pick a view that had a bit of everything. You can see I could use the white here, so that really made things helpful for me. I could get that tonal shift, I could do the lighter sky just by having that white with me. I think without that I would have really struggled. I think it would have made a much more darker and very kind of dull image. Despite having, the brighter yellows and the reds, I still think it would have been tricky to get that tonal shift. Having said that, you can see I'm really utilising the Amarcork yellow and the Gardenia yellow for the landscape at the bottom there. And the super bright green, so trying to use that leek green. I'm still adding in some of the oranges and the reds just to neutralise it again. And I do think that really helps. I think it makes it feel kind of autumnal. It was trying to get that balance between them because I did want them to all look like the seasons that they're supposed to be. So for this one, I used the orange and the safflower red a lot and really highlighted the orange and red trees. The amber was really nice here as well, and then I mixed that in with the elm green and some of the pine tree green in the distance. So I tried to stick with the warmer greens at the front with all of the reds and oranges, and then because of atmospheric perspective, I went cooler in the distance with the mountains right at the back there. So because of the indigo, I did manage to mix up the darker tones, so that was really helpful. I think having that dark shade definitely helped for this to have a bit more depth. It's probably not as much depth as I could have painted in. It's probably not, the most successful landscape, but it was helpful to try and use a range of the colours, and I was really pleased with the final piece, and I think it has a lovely autumnal vibe. Okay, and finally we are on to winter. So this one was definitely more about atmosphere and restraint, so I didn't use all of the colours in the winter set. My saving grace here was definitely the white and the geisha blue, which I think was super duper helpful for me to create the mountain scene. Being able to create that lighter sky was really helpful for me, and I do think that white is a must if you do get the winter set. Now there are quite a lot of dark tones like I mentioned earlier. You've got the russet brown, the dark brown. The patina was actually a really nice contrast to those, so I definitely used that in some of the trees. And the thing that surprised me the most was I was able to mix up some of the warm colours, which you'll see at the end as I come to the foreground, by using the iron oxide red and also the white. That was helpful too. But the iron oxide red and some of the blues was really helpful to try and get that shift. So I think that although it is definitely a cooler tone set, having that warm green, so the russet green, was a definite godsend. So I used that quite a lot because it did mix up beautifully with the white, and it's warmer, so that's probably the only one alongside the iron oxide red that does run warm. So I utilised that as much as I could. And I also used the Rikyou grey, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, but I think that was helpful as well to just try and get some of that tonal shift. I didn't want it completely cool. I think having that balance of the cool and warm really, really helped. The indigo blue, I meant to add that onto the mountain in the distance just for extra detail, but I totally forgot, so that didn't go in. But I did use that as a darker tone when mixing up some darker greens, especially alongside the patina. I was really pleased with the reference that I picked. I think it really highlights the colours within this set. And I would say this was definitely my favourite landscape to paint. It definitely felt like it came together really easily, and I enjoyed pushing out of my comfort zone with the cooler colours. So this was really fun to create and definitely surprised me. So after testing all 4 sets, I think it was really, really fun. And I think what makes this Irodori collection interesting isn't necessarily the versatility within the palette, but just the emotional sort of mood that it creates. Each one definitely changes the way that I approach the painting, because although I did add in the white, I definitely had to think more about the colours that I could mix up by being limited to these 12 tubes. Now, obviously, that's still quite a wide selection, and I definitely think there would be changes that I'd make to each palette. I think a perfect palette for me would be a mix of colours from each one. So, like I've mentioned, with adding in a warm blue to a set, or adding in a darker tone to the spring set, which would make it a little bit more versatile, I think would really help. But they definitely have their own atmospheres and vibes, and I think that's what makes them special. I don't think you need every single set, but it was really nice and is nice to have such a variety of this Holbein gouache. It is fast becoming one of my favourite brands for gouache now, and I'm really set now that I've been to Japan and bought these. I feel very lucky to have these in my collection, and I know they will get a lot of use. Testing them out in this way also helped me to learn how to use them, so I definitely recommend swatching your colours and mixing them as well to understand how you can use different shades within your work. It was really helpful and a massive learning experience for me, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this helpful. Let me know which your favourite painting is and which is your favourite set, if there was any surprises for you or which ones you have. Perhaps you're inspired by some of these sets and will make your own, or will be tempted to buy them yourself. I'd love to chat with you about it all in the comments. A big thank you for watching, a huge thank you to my patrons. Without their support I wouldn't be able to make these free YouTube videos every week. And thanks for watching. I will see you all next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later.